The night sky above Earth was calm, full of quiet stars, when something strange appeared. It was not announced, not on any schedule, and not on any radar before that moment. A silver ship, shaped like a crescent moon, slid out of the darkness and into low orbit. No weapons flashed, no engines roared, it simply hovered in silence. Inside that ship was Princess Kalira, heir to the mighty Vayari Empire. Her heart beat faster as she looked at the blue planet below. The humans did not yet know her name, but soon they would. She had come with a gift and a warning, and she hoped they would listen. Her people were at war with a cruel, spreading race that burned worlds, and she believed humans could become allies. But the risk was high. Her father, the Emperor, had told her, "Trust them only if they earn it." She carried something in her vault that could change Earth's future forever, but if it fell into the wrong hands, it could destroy them too. On Earth, alarms lit up in secret command centers. The United Global Defense Council held an emergency session within an hour. World leaders connected through encrypted lines. "It's not a hostile ship," one officer reported. "Its signal is White Flag Protocol, unknown origin." Yet the council was divided. Some wanted to fire warning shots, others wanted to open talks. Fear and greed whispered behind closed doors. A visitor like this meant power, technology, and possibly new weapons. One man in that room, Director Hallstrom, smiled faintly to himself. He had been waiting for something like this. To him, aliens were not friends, they were resources to exploit. As the silver ship slowly descended to a neutral landing base in the Atlantic Alliance sector, crowds were kept far away. Only select officials and a small military escort were allowed near. Captain Reeve, a decorated soldier with calm eyes and a scar across his cheek, was ordered to lead the welcoming unit. He did not know why they chose him. Perhaps because he had seen war, but was known for his sense of honor. As the ship's ramp hissed open, a soft mist rolled out, carrying a faint scent like metal and flowers. Then she appeared. Princess Kalira stepped down, her long white cloak trailing behind her, her eyes a deep silver blue that caught every light. She was young, regal, yet strangely cautious, as if the ground beneath her might vanish. "I come in peace," she said in clear, slow English. "I bring a message for the leaders of Earth." Her voice carried across the landing zone, recorded by hidden cameras and whispered about by thousands who would soon watch it online. Reeve stepped forward and saluted in the Earth Alliance style. "Welcome to Earth. You'll be escorted to the council chamber." But even as he spoke, he noticed how the politicians whispered behind her back, their eyes not on her words, but on the metallic case her guards carried. The ride to the council hall was quiet. Kalira looked out at the dark sea and the faraway city lights. "Your world is beautiful," she said softly. Reeve glanced at her through the shuttle glass. "It can be," he replied. "Depends on who's in charge." There was a pause then. She studied his face, as if trying to measure what kind of man he was. He did not smile like the others. He looked like someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. In the council chamber, they promised her safety. They promised talks of alliance, trade, and peace. But deep in a sealed room nearby, Director Hallstrom was already speaking with his aides. "We need her technology. Whatever energy core she offers, we take it. If she resists, we find leverage." They had no idea she was aware of their every move. Her ship was alive with sensors, and her people had warned her, "Humans are clever, but they can be hungry when they see something powerful." As the night went on, a storm gathered over the ocean. Lightning flashed against the glass walls of the chamber. Kalira stood before the council, holding a small crystal that glowed faintly in her palm. "This is a seed of the Vayari core," she said. "One core can power your planet for a century without harm. I give this as proof of my trust." Gasps filled the hall. Some leaned forward with wonder, others leaned back with greed. Far above, in the silent sky, satellites shifted their lenses toward the silver ship. Data streams flowed in secret. Files were copied. Codes were cracked. The betrayal had already begun, though the princess still believed in the promise of peace. Captain Reeve watched her as the storm rumbled, and something in his chest tightened. He had seen this look before. In war zones, in villages where the strong made promises to the weak, and then broke them. He wondered if history was about to repeat itself, only this time with stars as the witness. When the council ended the session and escorted her to the guest wing, the corridors felt colder. Guards stood with stiff faces, their hands a little too close to their weapons. Kalira walked in silence, her cloak brushing the floor. She felt the weight of Earth pressing in on her, and for the first time since leaving her homeworld, she wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. Somewhere, far beyond the clouds, her fleet waited for her word. The next morning began under a heavy sky. Gray clouds drifted low over the Atlantic Alliance headquarters, and the ocean wind carried a chill that seemed to seep into every corridor of the council complex. Princess Kalira sat in her assigned quarters, a room lined with modern Earth furniture yet feeling strangely hollow. She had placed the glowing crystal core on a table beside her, its soft blue light pulsing like a heart. It was a symbol of her faith, a gesture that carried the weight of her people's future. She believed alliances began with trust, and so she had given the first piece of that trust freely. But now, as hours passed without a clear response from Earth's leaders, a quiet unease settled over her. Captain Reeve arrived at her door just after sunrise. He wore his dark field uniform, the kind that carried no medals, only the marks of a man who had lived through battle. His eyes scanned the hallway before stepping in. "They're still in discussion," he said. "A gift like that, it's causing more noise than you think." Kalira turned to him, her silver blue eyes calm but searching. "Noise," she repeated softly. "Do they not see what it means? That I offer peace without a demand." Reeve hesitated. "They see it. But people in power, especially here, rarely take gifts without asking what they cost. And some don't like owing anyone." In a chamber far below, the council members argued. Director Hallstrom stood at the center of the table, his voice sharp. "She's offering us a limitless energy source," he said. "Do you understand what that means? Not just power for our cities. Power for our fleets, for our weapons, for dominance." An older diplomat frowned. "She asked for nothing but a treaty. Mutual defense. Trade." Hallstrom shook his head. "Treaties change. But if we hold the source, we hold the stars." There was no vote yet, only quiet calculations behind the council's closed doors. Back in the guest wing, Kalira decided to step outside. She requested a walk along the secured balcony that overlooked the sea. Reeve accompanied her, the wind tugging at his coat as they walked past silent guards. "You seem troubled," he said, watching her fingers tighten slightly on the railing. "When I left my world, I believed humans would see this gift as a sign of friendship," she answered. "But your leaders look at it as a weapon before they see it as a bridge." Reeve didn't argue. He had served too many years to paint Earth's government as noble. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "But not all of us see it that way." She glanced at him then, her voice a whisper barely carried by the wind. "Do you?" He looked out at the gray sea. "I see a chance. But chances can die fast here." As the day moved on, the council finally sent for her. In a tall glass chamber with banners of many nations hanging overhead, they welcomed her again with polite words. The crystal core was placed on a pedestal in the center, glowing softly while cameras recorded every angle. "Your gesture is remarkable," said Chancellor Rykov, the official voice of the council. "But to accept such a gift, we must also understand the threat that drives you to offer it." Kalira stepped forward, her cloak flowing like a sheet of moonlight behind her. "The threat is real," she said. "The Kravari swarm has consumed 12 systems. They will find you in time. We offer this core so you may prepare, so you may join us before it is too late." Her voice carried a quiet urgency, but some in the chamber only heard the parts they wanted. Consumed systems. Prepare. Join us. To men like Hallstrom, it sounded less like peace and more like an invitation to control a resource before others could. That night, in secret, plans were drawn. Agents in black uniforms entered the storage vault where the second Vayari crate was kept, scanning its surface, trying to unlock its codes. Kalira had predicted this might happen. Her people had warned her, trust is the first door, betrayal is the second. She stayed awake in her room, staring at the stars, her mind torn between hope and the shadow creeping into her thoughts. Reeve returned just past midnight, finding her still at the window. "You haven't slept," he said. "Sleep doesn't come when one feels watched," she replied softly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Something's moving behind the curtains. I don't know how far they'll go, but I know what greed can make men do." For the first time, she smiled faintly, a sad and knowing curve of her lips. "You speak as if you have seen this before." Reeve nodded. "Different places. Different people. Same story." Outside, the storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air cold and clean. The ocean reflected a pale moon. And yet, inside the halls of power, something darker was building, a plan to turn a gift of trust into a weapon of control. Kalira closed her eyes and whispered a single line in her language, a phrase the translators did not understand: "May the stars forgive what is about to come." The following day dawned bright and cold, but inside the walls of the Atlantic Alliance headquarters, the air was heavy with a tension that few dared to name. Princess Kalira rose early, her hair bound in a soft silver braid that marked her royal station, and stepped onto the balcony once again. The sea was calm now, almost too calm, as if the world was holding its breath. The crystal core still pulsed faintly in her quarters, a reminder of her gift and her gamble. Somewhere deep inside her chest, an uneasy feeling had begun to take root, a whisper that trust freely given was rarely left untouched by hungry hands. Captain Reeve arrived soon after, his face lined with the fatigue of sleepless nights. "There's movement in the lower levels," he said, keeping his voice low even though no one else was within earshot. "Security access logs were altered. Someone is trying to open the second crate you brought." Kalira turned her gaze to him, her eyes sharp, but her voice remained calm. "I suspected they might try. Humans are brave, but your leaders, some of them, see opportunity before they see friendship." Reeve's jaw tightened. "I warned them you gave that core as a gesture of peace. But peace doesn't profit them the way power does." Later, in the Grand Council chamber, officials met again behind closed doors. The mood was no longer polite curiosity, it was hunger veiled as strategy. Director Hallstrom leaned forward, his fingers drumming on the table. "With that core, we could build ships twice as fast. Arm colonies in months, not years. Do you think the other nations out there won't take it if we don't?" The older diplomat, who had once argued for patience, now only sat silent. Fear of being outmatched had started to wrap its fingers around their minds. That evening, Kalira was summoned for what they called a technical review. She was escorted into a chamber where the second crate was already being tampered with. Panels had been removed, faint scorch marks lined its surface. "This was not part of the agreement," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a queen though she was but a princess here. Hallstrom offered a smooth smile. "There was no agreement, princess. Only a gift. And gifts, once given, belong to the receiver." The words were cold, final. Reeve watched from the shadows, his jaw set, his hand resting on the edge of his coat as though he wanted to reach for something he could not draw in this place. His orders were to protect the guest, not to fight his own command. But the way Kalira stood, proud yet wounded, pulled at something in him that went beyond duty. That night, the Council sent a secret transmission to the outer colonies, plans to mass-produce the energy cores, regardless of the Vayari Treaty. They did not know Kalira's people had embedded a failsafe, a silent watcher within the crystal itself. The moment unauthorized hands tried to extract its secrets, a hidden signal would travel through the stars, alerting her father's fleet of betrayal. Kalira stood at her window as the city lights flickered across the water. Her hands tightened on the railing. "I came here with trust," she whispered to herself. "I offered a bridge, and they are building a trap beneath it." Reeve stepped into the room quietly. "They're planning to move the core to a secure lab at midnight," he said. Once it's gone, you'll have no leverage. She turned to him slowly. Then the bridge will burn, Captain. And the fire will not start with me. The midnight air was sharp when the convoy moved. Black transport carriers rolled through the silent streets, escorted by armored drones. Kalira did not try to stop them. She only watched from the shadows of her balcony, her cloak wrapped tight, her face unreadable. For a moment, a streak of distant lightning flashed across the horizon, though no storm had been forecast. It was not weather, it was a signal. Far across the void, the Vayari fleet stirred. Long-range scouts received the coded whisper from the princess's corps. Betrayal was not yet war, but it was a step on the same path. Inside the council building, Hallstrom stood over the secured vault, a thin smile curling his lips as the core was locked inside. Soon, he said to his aides, we will have the power to dictate the stars. But not everyone shared his triumph. In the quiet hours before dawn, Captain Reeve walked the halls alone, his thoughts heavy. He had served Earth all his life, but something about this mission, the greed, the deception, the hollow words of honor, felt like a wound that would not heal. And in that moment, under the pale light of the moons, he made a choice. If Earth would not protect the trust that was offered, then he would. Kalira sensed his decision without words. When he entered her chamber just before sunrise, their eyes met in silence, and that silence spoke louder than any council decree. Something had shifted, and the path ahead would not be one of peace alone. The dawn that followed felt colder than the one before, though the sea outside the Alliance headquarters was calm as glass. The city moved as usual, lights flickered on, transports hummed across the water bridges, and the flags of peace still waved in the harbor breeze. But to Princess Kalira, those flags had begun to look like veils hiding a blade. She had given them trust. She had given them something that was more than technology. It was a lifeline, a symbol that the Vayari Empire could open its gates to humanity as equals. And now that gift had been stolen in the dark. The council acted as though nothing had happened. That morning, Hallstrom greeted her with a smile that was almost warm, almost human, as though the midnight theft had never taken place. Your generosity will save many lives, he said, walking beside her through the hall of polished stone and steel. The core will help stabilize our colonies. That is what you wanted, is it not? Kalira's silver eyes turned toward him, unreadable. I wanted to help you stand, she said softly, not teach you to steal. Hallstrom's smile faltered for a moment, but only a moment. Sometimes, Princess, survival requires boldness. That afternoon, Kalira stood before the great window of her assigned quarters, watching the distant waves. The crystal core no longer pulsed on her table. It had been locked away beneath layers of steel, out of her reach and out of her control. She could feel the echo of it, though, a faint vibration through the ether, like a heartbeat being smothered. The Vayari code embedded within was not meant to be used this way. It was a bridge, not a weapon. Captain Reeve entered without ceremony, his face shadowed. He placed a sealed datapad on her desk. They're moving fast, he said. Labs in Alaska, Luna, and the Belt are already drawing plans to replicate it. They won't wait for your consent. Kalira's fingers hovered over the datapad but did not touch it. And when they fail, she asked, they won't stop. They'll keep tearing at it until it works, or until it breaks. A thin, bitter smile touched her lips. And when it breaks, Captain, it will not break quietly. Night fell again, and the first cracks began to show. On the secure frequencies of deep space, an unmarked transmission was intercepted by Vayari scouts. It was not a formal plea for alliance, not even a negotiation. It was a boast, a signal sent from Earth's inner council to a rogue trading faction. We have acquired the core. Production begins soon. Reserve your fleets. The Vayari Emperor received the echo 3 days later. His face, carved with years of quiet strength, darkened as he listened. His only daughter had offered peace. The humans had answered with betrayal. The order he gave was not yet war. But it was a shadow cast across the stars. Move the silent guard. Watch their skies. On Earth, Kalira felt the shift before the message reached her. That night, when she looked at the horizon, she saw a faint shimmer in the upper atmosphere, cloaked ships sliding into orbit, unseen by human sensors. Captain Reeve stood beside her on the balcony. His voice was low, tight with something that sounded like regret. "I warned them. I told them you were here for peace. And they chose war," she answered. Her tone was calm, but her hand gripped the railing so tightly that the metal creaked. "Do you know what the Guard will do if they are forced to act?" Reeve didn't answer. He had seen enough war to understand. The next morning, Hallstrom called an emergency council. Their experiments with the core had triggered a surge, an uncontrolled discharge that fried an entire lab's power grid and left 5 scientists in critical condition. Yet even then, they spoke not of returning it, but of weaponizing its energy before the Vayari could react. Kalira walked into that council room like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Stop this now," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Return what you have taken. My people will still listen if you act with honor. Delay longer, and the window will close." Hallstrom leaned back in his chair, hands folded, and for the first time he did not bother to hide his true expression, hunger and calculation, cold as deep space. "You came to offer us strength," he said. "We will not beg for it. We will take it. And if your empire wishes to challenge us for what is now ours, let them come." The chamber fell silent. Even those who had been uneasy before did not speak against him. The choice had been made. That night, Kalira stood alone beneath the human stars, her cloak drawn tight against the wind. Reeve found her there, his voice low. "What will you do?" She turned her gaze toward the dark sky where invisible warships waited. "I came to build a bridge," she whispered. "But bridges burn faster than they are built. Tomorrow, the first flame will fall." And as if the universe wished to answer her, a streak of unnatural light flashed across the horizon, silent, too fast to be a meteor. The Guard had arrived in full force. The morning was silent in the city, yet there was a pressure in the air that people could not explain. Skies were clear, streets were busy, and screens across the world still flashed messages of progress and unity. But high above that blue sky, beyond the reach of satellites, something had moved into place. Invisible shapes hovered in orbit, silent and waiting. Princess Kalira felt it in her bones before any signal reached her. She stood by the balcony, her cloak trailing in the wind, and her fingers clenched against the rail. She had warned them. She had spoken calmly, pleaded with reason, even offered one last chance for honor. But the humans had chosen the path of ambition over truth. They had taken what was not theirs, and now her people had arrived to collect the cost. Captain Reeve entered quietly, his boots heavy against the polished floor. His face carried the look of a man who had stayed awake too long with thoughts too heavy to put down. "There's movement in orbit," he said without a greeting. "Power surges at the high-altitude stations. Cloaking fields. Not ours. Yours." Kalira's silver eyes turned toward him, cold as the void between stars. "Then they are here." "Yes," he said. He hesitated, his jaw tight. "And the council still thinks they can bargain from strength." Bargain was not the word. Hours later, the council chamber was filled with hard voices and sharp words. Hallstrom stood at the center, calm but ruthless, speaking of defense grids, orbital strikes, and contingency plans. They had the core. They had begun to study its potential. They believed that gave them power enough to stare down an empire. Kalira stood apart, her presence like a blade at rest. "You mistake patience for weakness," she said at last, her voice rising over the noise. "The Guard is here to observe, not to negotiate. If you fire first, you will not only lose the core, you will lose your world." Hallstrom's lips curled in a thin, cold smile. "We are done with warnings, Princess. The era of being underestimated ends today." The words settled in the room like a fuse being lit. That night, the first shot was not fired by the Vayari. It came from a human defense station hidden in the shadow of the moon, a silent spear of energy meant to blind the watchers in orbit. The blast struck nothing visible, but the void shimmered for a heartbeat, and then the darkness tore open. A Veari cruiser revealed itself, its hull black and faceted like a shard of night, its shields rippling as the human weapon struck. For a moment, the world watched in silence through the leaking feeds and scrambled transmissions. Then the cruiser responded, not with destruction, but with a message that echoed across every frequency. "Return what is ours. You have won Dawn." But the message only fed the Council's pride. Hallstrom ordered a mobilization, and fleets scrambled to the edge of Earth's gravity well, weapons armed and stations on high alert. Civilian screens showed none of it. To the streets, life still went on. But in the shadowed halls of power, war was already breathing. Kalira left the Council that night without a word. Reeve followed her into the cold corridors, his voice low. "If they strike back, there will be no warning." "There will be no need," she replied. "The Guard does not strike for victory. It strikes to erase the lesson." She walked to the balcony once more, looking up at the stars now hidden behind a veil of gathering clouds. She thought of the children she had seen laughing in the markets, of the old man who had bowed to her without fear, of the fragile thread of trust that had once been there. And she wondered how much of that thread would remain after the fire. The first strike came not as a roar, but as a silent wave. Just before dawn, the sky above the Pacific shimmered, and power grids across 3 nations failed at once. Lights died, communications cut, and in the darkened cities, the people looked up at the stars, stars that now flickered with shapes they had never seen before. A Veari warning, measured and deliberate. No cities burned. No lives were lost. But the message was clear: the next move would not be so gentle. In the command bunker beneath the Capitol, Hallstrom watched the feed in grim silence. "So they want to scare us," he said. "Then let them watch what fear makes of us." Kalira stood across from him, her face unreadable. "You are not afraid," she said. "You are blinded. Fear listens. Pride only shouts." Hallstrom turned away. "Then pray, Princess, that your people shout louder. Because we will not return that core." Reeve stayed behind as the chamber emptied. His hands rested on the table, knuckles pale. "You know what comes next," he said quietly. Kalira nodded. "Yes. The dawn they promised has come." Far above them, the Guard shifted its formation, silent and cold, ready to answer that defiance with something far more permanent. Dawn came with an unnatural stillness. The sky over Earth held the same soft colors it always did, pale blue turning gold at the horizon, yet every sensor, every satellite, and every nervous pair of eyes staring upward knew the air was lying. Somewhere above that quiet ceiling of clouds, the Veari Guard was no longer just waiting. It was aligning. Kalira stood on the high balcony of the Council spire, the wind tangling her cloak as the city below tried to keep its rhythm. Markets opened. Transports moved. Screens played news that felt emptier by the hour. Yet the undercurrent of fear had become something sharp now, a thing that lived in the silence between footsteps. She could feel the city holding its breath. Captain Reeve joined her, his uniform heavier than before, the weight of too many sleepless nights in his stance. He handed her a small device, a military scanner, unmarked, stripped of encryption. "They've tripled the patrols in orbit," he said. "Half the fleet is already in formation above the Atlantic. The other half waits for a command they don't understand." "And Hallstrom?" she asked, her voice quiet but edged. "He wants to strike first again," Reeve replied. "He thinks a clean, fast blow will make your people retreat. He's calling it a decisive lesson." Kalira turned her silver gaze toward the distant horizon. "He is right about one thing. There will be a lesson today." The first sign came at 7:14 hours. A tremor in the comm bands, subtle, precise, and final. Civilian networks blinked out across an entire hemisphere. Power grids followed. The cities on the coast fell dark in a rolling wave of silence. People flooded the streets, staring at dead screens, holding useless phones, whispering in growing dread. From the balcony, Kalira saw the first shadow pass. It was not like any ship Earth had ever built. No engines, no seams, only a dark, faceted shape that swallowed the dawnlight and cast it back in pale reflections. 1 became 3. 3 became 20. They slid across the clouds like silent predators. In the council's war room, alarms howled and officers shouted coordinates. Hallstrom stood at the center, barking orders with the certainty of a man who could not afford doubt. Fire control, prepare pulse cannons. Target their nearest cluster. If they want fear, give them fire. Missiles rose from hidden silos, their trails bright against the dimming sky. For a moment, the world thought it might bite back. But the Veari Guard did not scatter. It simply shifted. Beams of pale white light lanced down, not as explosions but as curtains that bent the missiles' paths, dissolved their guidance, and sent them spiraling harmlessly into the ocean. No cities burned. Not yet. Kalira moved through the halls of the spire, her steps echoing in corridors now filled with soldiers and panicked staff. She found Reeve waiting by the transport bay, his jaw set. "This is the last chance," he said. "If you have any influence left, use it." She hesitated, then handed him a small, encoded crystal. "Take this to the Southern Command. It is my seal. If the guard begins its descent, show them this and open a path. Some must live. And you?" he asked. "I will face them," she said simply. "They came for me as much as for the Corps." Above, the sky finally broke. The first strike fell at 8:02. It was not fire, not the apocalyptic rain the Council had warned of, but a pulse that moved through the atmosphere like a silent wave. It shut down defense grids, erased orbital stations, and silenced every weapon that had been aimed at the Veari fleet. Cities went dark again, this time for good. Panic surged in the streets. Civilians ran toward the mountains, the rivers, anywhere that was not beneath that shadow. And in the chaos, Hallstrom still shouted for resistance, calling his fleets to rally, demanding weapons that no longer answered. Kalira stepped out onto the plaza before the spire as the first Veari landing craft descended, long, sleek, and silent as knives. Around her, soldiers raised their rifles, their hands shaking, their orders lost in the noise of crumbling authority. She lifted her voice, sharp and clear. "Do not fire. You cannot stop what comes with bullets." Some listened. Many did not. The first shots cracked through the morning, small and futile. The guard did not return them. Not yet. They formed a perimeter, shields glowing faintly, and began their march toward the council heart. The sky above them rippled again, and this time the second wave arrived. Hundreds of ships, larger and darker, their shapes blotting out the morning sun until the city lay in an eerie twilight. Reeve's voice came through the static of a broken calm. "Kalira, what are they doing?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "They are giving humanity its answer." And then, far to the west, the first city burned. A single column of white fire, clean and surgical, erased a weapons factory and nothing more. But the sound of it carried across the oceans, and the sight of that rising column tore the last illusion of safety from the world. The day the sky broke had come, and with it the truth. This was no war for conquest. This was a sentence being carried out.